before the world saw the breakup, before the headlines and whispers, there was silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from anger, but from exhaustion. Behind the red carpets and the perfect smiles, Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman were living a love story the world worshipped, and quietly watched collapse. The silver frame still sits untouched. Inside it, her face is frozen in a moment the world once called perfect. 2 hearts, 1 promise, a photograph that once meant forever. Now, it gathers dust like an old confession no one dares to clean. 20 years ago, they were Australia's golden couple. The world saw brilliance, glamour, and devotion. What no one saw was the trembling hand behind the spotlight. A man trying to love, to stay, to heal, yet failing quietly in the noise of applause. Keith Urban once said, "Music can heal every wound, but some wounds, it seems, never learn the rhythm of recovery." At 58, the man who filled stadiums and hearts finally admitted one truth that outshines every stage light. He lost the only woman who ever truly loved him. Nicole Kidman wasn't just a chapter in his story, she was the novel he misread, line by line. They met under the glitter of G'day LA in 2005, a night meant to celebrate Australians shining abroad. By 2006, they were married in Sydney, a picture of grace and destiny. They built a home, 2 daughters, and a dream that stretched across oceans. But on September 30th, 2025, the ink dried on their divorce papers in Tennessee. And with that signature, a 2-decade-long melody fell silent. Music fades lower, voice slows. Now, as Nashville sinks into the orange hush of another sunset, Keith sits alone. A guitar rests across his knees. He doesn't strum. He listens. To ghosts. To echoes. To the sound of love fading like the last note of a song the crowd has already forgotten. And from that silence, 5 lessons remain. 5 truths carved in heartbreak, fame, and the stillness between 2 people who once swore forever. But before we reach those lessons, we must return to the beginning. To the boy who believed music could save him, before he learned that sometimes it can also destroy. Soft acoustic guitar _begins. Keith Lionel Urban was born in Whangarei, New Zealand, under skies wide enough to hold every dream he didn't yet know he had. His father drove trucks. His mother sold clothes in a small shop. At night, music filled their home. Johnny Cash, Glenn Campbell, Dolly Parton. Voices that carried stories of heartbreak wrapped in melody. One evening, his father placed a small guitar on the kitchen table and said, "6 strings? That's all the world you'll ever need." Keith's fingers bled before they ever learned grace. He practiced until dawn. The wood of the neck grew smooth beneath his persistence. In those silent mornings, while others slept, he whispered his first confessions to the frets. Loneliness, hope, hunger. Queensland became his proving ground. The boy from across the Tasman now stood on smoky bar stages, the crowd half drunk, the amps half broken. But he played as if heaven itself was listening. He wasn't chasing fame then. He was chasing belonging, a place where sound could mean love. Years later, when reporters asked about those nights, he only smiled and said, "That's where I learned the danger of silence. If the music stopped, everything I was afraid of could be heard." By his early 20s, Nashville called, the city where country dreams are made and broken in equal measure. He packed a single bag, a guitar, and a photograph of his parents waving goodbye on the porch. The flight felt endless. The dream heavier than the luggage. America was merciless. Bright lights, long rejections, empty pockets. He slept on couches, sold his last amplifier to pay rent, and sang backup for singers who barely remembered his name. Yet every failure sharpened his tone. Every heartbreak tuned his soul. There were nights he stared into a cracked mirror and whispered, "One day, they'll listen. One day, the music will matter." But dreams rarely arrive without shadows. The loneliness that once fueled his art began to feed on him. Applause turned into pressure. Exhaustion became escape. When he finally stood under the Nashville lights, the crowd roaring his name, he thought he'd made it. But deep down, that same voice whispered, "You can play for the world and still have no one waiting when the music ends." He didn't yet know that the very thing he worshipped, music, would one day become both the gift and the curse that cost him the love of his life. By the early 2000s, the name Keith Urban had begun to echo beyond the smoky bars. His voice carried the dust of the Australian outback and the heartbreak of Nashville. Tender, wounded, but fearless. Success came slowly, like dawn creeping through a half-open curtain. Songs like "Somebody Like You" and "You'll Think of Me" turned him into country music's next promise. crowd sang his pain back to him, and for the first time he felt less alone. But behind the applause was the same boy from Queensland, shy, uncertain, still afraid that happiness was something he didn't know how to keep. Then, in 2005, fate wore red lipstick and an effortless smile. It was at G'day LA, a gala for Australian artists living abroad. The room shimmered with laughter, champagne, and nostalgia for home. Across the crowd, he saw her, Nicole Kidman, radiant yet quiet, as though she carried her own weather, calm and untouched by the noise. He hesitated. A guitar pick tapped nervously in his palm. "She's out of your league," someone whispered. But then she looked up, and the world softened. He crossed the room, words tumbling out, something clumsy about music and jet lag. She laughed, and that laugh became his favorite sound. From that night, messages flowed like secret chords, texts about sunsets in Sydney, half-written lyrics, and quiet confessions. He once told her, "Your voice sounds like home." She replied, "Then maybe you should stay." In June 2006, under soft Sydney rain, he stood at the altar watching her walk down the aisle. The church smelled of lilies and salt air. Her eyes shimmered with the quiet fire that made the world believe in love stories again. "Do you promise to love her for the rest of your life?" "I do." That moment, he believed the promise would never break. The early years were golden. Mornings filled with laughter, little notes on the fridge. "Smile today. You've got this. I believe in you." Evenings when she read a script under the warm glow of a lamp while he strummed quietly beside her. Two worlds, film and song, orbiting in perfect harmony. When their first daughter, Sunday Rose, was born in 2008, he cried harder than he had ever cried on stage. Nicole held the baby and whispered, "We did it." He kissed her forehead and said, "You made me real." Then came Faith Margaret in 2010, born through surrogacy. Proof, he said, that love can find its way through distance, science, and prayer. The house in Nashville became a sanctuary of laughter and lullabies. He postponed tours. She stepped back from blockbusters. They chased sunsets down long highways, Fleetwood Mac playing softly through the speakers, their daughters asleep in the back seat. Once Nicole turned to him, sunlight pouring through the car window. "If there's a next life," she said softly, "I'd still choose you." He didn't answer. He just squeezed her hand, because some vows are too sacred for words. The world adored them. The perfect couple, the fairy tale love. Photographers captured the smiles. Magazines printed the headlines. Australia's golden pair. But perfection is a fragile thing. And behind the red carpets and spotlights, the first cracks had already begun to form. Music fades to quiet tension. Fame has a strange rhythm. It gives and takes in equal measure. It rewards brilliance, but it also demands everything in return. And soon, Keith and Nicole would discover that even love, under the glare of fame, can start to fade in silence. Fame doesn't shout, it whispers. At first, it promises everything: applause, recognition, forever. But slowly, quietly, it begins to take. And in the home of Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman, that whisper had already begun to echo. Fame was supposed to be the reward, the long-awaited light after years of struggle. Yet, the brighter the lights became, the longer their shadows grew. Between Nashville and Los Angeles, their lives split into time zones and time limits. She filmed until dawn under Parisian skies. He performed before 100,000 people in Texas dust. Their good mornings turned into good nights. Love began to live inside voicemails and text messages. Still, they tried. Nicole would leave him notes inside his guitar case. "Play for love, not survival." He'd send her demo tapes with scribbled titles. "Come home soon." To the world, they were perfect. The red carpets, the laughter, the hand-holding, the eyes that seemed to find each other in every flash of a camera. But cameras capture light, not truth. What they couldn't capture was the quiet ache of distance. On some nights, Keith would land in a city where her movie was playing on every screen. He'd walk past the posters, her smile larger than life, and whisper, "I miss you." When Sunday Rose began school, Nicole slowed her career to stay close. She spent mornings packing lunches, evenings reading bedtime stories. Keith tried to match that rhythm, but music had always been his heartbeat. And now, it was pulling him away again. Another album, another tour, another promise to come home soon. Once she told him, "You write songs about love, but you forget to live them." He laughed softly, not out of mockery, but fear, because he knew she was right. In 2010, when Faith Margaret arrived, it felt like a second chance, a chance to heal what distance had stolen. And for a while it worked. Family picnics, quiet Christmases, mornings filled with lullabies instead of alarms. But fame is a jealous lover, it doesn't share. By 2011, Keith was on another world tour. Nicole was on another film set, halfway across the world. The tabloids called it the perfect balance. In truth, it was survival dressed as success. He'd return home to the smell of coffee and lavender, the sound of the girls' laughter echoing down the hallway. Nicole would open the door, eyes tired but smiling. "You're home." "For now," he'd whisper. They would sit on the porch, the Tennessee night wrapping around them. "Do you ever think we'll grow old together?" she once asked. "I hope so," he said. "If I could, I'd play music until my last breath, just to hear you sing one line back." She smiled faintly. "Then don't go before me, okay? Because without you, I wouldn't know how to sing anymore." But love, like melody, needs rhythm, and theirs was beginning to falter. The more he played, the more distant she became, not out of anger but exhaustion. The world kept asking her about red carpets, and him about romance, while both of them just wanted quiet. There were still moments of peace, road trips with the girls, quiet breakfasts, laughter that felt like forgiveness. But peace, when neglected, fades, and so it did. By 2015, the cracks were visible. Smiles became rehearsed. Touches became polite. Every photograph was a performance. Every interview a script. Reporters still called them Australia's golden couple. But even gold, no matter how bright, can tarnish. He once told a friend backstage, "I'm singing the same love songs every night, but I don't know if I believe them anymore." Yet when he looked out into the audience, he saw her face everywhere, in the crowd, in the lights, in the silence between verses. She had become his muse and his ghost. Fame, the thing that once gave them everything, had turned into a mirror, reflecting all they had lost: simplicity, sincerity, and the small tendernesses that fame doesn't pay for. Nicole once said in an interview, "Love isn't about the grand gestures. It's about the small things no one sees." Keith watched that clip alone in a hotel room at 2 a.m. He muted the TV and stared at his reflection. He looked like a man applauded by millions, but understood by none. Outside, the city roared with noise. Inside, the silence was deafening. And it was there, between the final encore and the empty hotel bed, that the real fracture began. Not with shouting, not with scandal, but with silence. The kind of silence that lingers after a door closes. The kind that follows you into every room. By 2011, Keith was living between hotel rooms and concert arenas. Nicole spent long months filming abroad. What once felt like freedom now tasted like loneliness. Each phone call grew shorter. Each "I love you" sounded more like a habit than a heartbeat. He'd stand in the middle of another sold-out crowd, guitar slung low, lights blinding his eyes, and still feel utterly unseen. The louder the applause, the lonelier he became. One night, after a show in London, he stared into the mirror, pale, empty-eyed, half drunk. He whispered to his reflection, "You're losing her." The reflection said nothing back. That night he relapsed. To the world, Keith Urban was unstoppable, the country star, the husband of Hollywood's golden woman, the man who conquered addiction and turned it into melody. But to himself, he was just a ghost, chasing echoes of the life he used to have. Nicole called often. "Are you okay?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling across the line. "I'm fine," he lied. She paused. "Don't do this to yourself," he smiled bitterly. "You worry too much?" But she was right to worry. On that London night, surrounded by strangers and empty glasses, Keith made a choice that would haunt him forever. A moment of weakness, born not out of malice, but despair. When Nicole found out, she didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She simply looked at him, calm, quiet, devastatingly composed. "I'm not disappointed because you betrayed me," she said. "I'm disappointed because you betrayed yourself." He dropped to his knees, tears cutting through exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll change. I'll fix this." But forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a wound that bleeds in silence. She gave him another chance, because love always does. He went to rehab again. He poured himself into therapy, wrote songs he never released, each one soaked in guilt, each lyric a confession too painful to finish. In interviews, he smiled. On stage, he shone. But at home, the air grew thick with unspoken grief. There were nights he'd walk into the living room and see her reading under the lamplight. eyes steady, but distant. "Do you still love me, Keith?" she asked softly once. He was drunk, but not with whiskey, but with shame, and he said the most foolish words of his life. "I don't know." Her silence was the sound of something breaking. The next morning, her suitcase stood by the door. A note on the table read, "I won't hate you, but I can't keep loving someone who doesn't know what he wants." He's kept that note ever since, folded, fragile, inside the case of the guitar he no longer plays. For years after, they appeared together. Red carpets, family photos, smiles for the cameras. But love had already left the frame. He once told a friend quietly, "We didn't break up in 2025. We broke long before that. We just didn't know how to stop pretending." By 2015, even his music began to sound tired. Fans said he was evolving. He knew he was unraveling. He stopped writing for months. He'd sit in his studio, guitar across his lap, fingers trembling, afraid to touch the strings because every note reminded him of her voice saying, "You love music more than you love me." He tried to fight it, with work, with silence, with recovery. But the truth followed him everywhere. He hadn't lost her because she changed. He lost her because he stopped fighting to keep her. Soft instrumental swells, strings, and distant piano. When the divorce papers finally came, years later, they weren't a shock. They were a conclusion written long ago in invisible ink. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just looked at him with eyes that had seen every version of him, the dreamer, the addict, the lover, the liar. And she said quietly, "Maybe the kindest thing we can do for each other is let go." He nodded, and for the first time, silence felt merciful. The world read headlines. He read regret. Music fades, gentle heartbeat rhythm begins. In the years that followed, Keith would learn the hardest truth about fame, that it records everything, the songs, the smiles, even the mistakes. But what it never records is the sound of forgiveness. Every love story has a soundtrack. Some end in applause, others fade in silence. For Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman, it ended like a song that didn't know how to stop, still echoing long after the last note had been played. When the divorce became public, the world gasped. Headlines screamed Hollywood's sweetheart split, but for those who knew them, it wasn't a scandal. It was an inevitability, the slow unraveling of two people who had loved too deeply, too differently. Behind the cameras, there was no shouting match, no betrayal left to expose. Just exhaustion. Just two souls who had tried to carry too much of each other for too long. Nicole retreated into stillness. Not the kind you find in silence, but the kind you earn after years of noise. She spent her mornings walking through her Nashville garden, bare feet against the earth, rediscovering what it meant to be alone. And at peace with it, Keith poured his heart into recovery. No more pretending, no more performances for applause. Just truth, even when it hurt. He cut his hair short, kept his circle smaller, and spent months writing songs he never released. Songs that weren't made for radio, but for healing. The kind you play when you're trying to remember who you were before the world started clapping. He said in an interview years later, "The hardest thing isn't losing someone you love. It's realizing you lost yourself trying to keep them." And that became his quiet redemption, the journey back to himself. He started small. A morning coffee on the porch, no cameras, no noise. A conversation with his daughters about love, about failure, about the beauty of trying again. He began to laugh again, not for show, but from the soul. And Nicole, she bloomed again too. Acting wasn't an escape anymore. It became a reflection. Every character she played held a piece of her. The woman who had loved fiercely, hurt quietly, and walked away gracefully. In one interview, when asked if she still spoke to Keith, she smiled faintly and said, "Some bonds don't need words. They just exist. No bitterness. No blame, just truth, calm and complete." They both learned something only heartbreak can teach, that sometimes love doesn't end because it dies. It ends because it grows beyond what two people can hold. And maybe that's okay. In 2027, Keith released a song that sounded different. Stripped down, raw, just voice and guitar. It wasn't about fame or redemption, it was about forgiveness. The lyrics went something like this: "I loved you in the silence. I loved you through the fall. I learned that letting go can be love after all." He never confirmed it was about Nicole. He didn't have to. The truth was in every note. When asked what he'd say to her if they met again, he paused. "I'd thank her," he said, "for teaching me that love isn't about forever. It's about the moments that change you, even if they break you. And in that moment, he wasn't the rock star or the broken husband or the man who lost everything. He was just Keith, human, humble, healed. Nicole's journey mirrored his. She once said, "We live our lives like movies, waiting for the perfect ending." But real life isn't about perfect endings. It's about beautiful truths. Her truth was simple. She had loved, she had lost, and she had survived. The tabloids moved on. The headlines faded. But what remained was quieter, deeper, a kind of peace that doesn't ask for attention. Years later, they would see each other again. Not at an award show, not at a red carpet, but at their daughter's graduation. She smiled. He smiled back. No grand reconciliation. No tearful scene. Just two people who had once shared everything, now sharing a quiet nod. The unspoken language of forgiveness. Their daughters laughed between them, the sun soft on their faces, and for a brief moment, the years melted away. They weren't Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman, the headlines, the symbols, the spectacle. They were just two parents, proud, grateful, still bound by something invisible. Not love as it was, but love as it remained. Fame had given them everything. The spotlight, the stage, the story. But it was loss that finally taught them who they really were. In the quiet years that followed, Keith once said to a friend, "Maybe we were never meant to last forever. Maybe we were meant to remind each other what love is supposed to feel like." And that, perhaps, was their truth. That the greatest love stories aren't the ones that last, but the ones that leave you better than they found you. They had been fire and melody, storm and sunlight, chaos and calm. And in their own imperfect way, they had found a kind of forever. Because real love doesn't vanish. It evolves. It becomes friendship, respect, memory. It becomes a song you don't play anymore, but still hum when no one's listening. Their story was never a tragedy. It was a lesson, written in music, silence, and grace. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Not on the radio, not on stage, but in the space between two hearts that once beat in harmony and learned to beat alone. Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman didn't fail. They lived, they loved, and they learned. And maybe that's the most honest ending any story can have. Some songs don't need an ending, just an echo.